I'm Abigail Foster, 35 years old, and my entire life has been defined by my family's quiet cruelty. At my father's 60th birthday celebration in Raleigh's historic hall, I sat tucked away in the corner, staring at nothing more than a cold, dry piece of bread on a stained tablecloth. Laughter echoed around me like music at a party I'd never been invited to, but my stepmother's voice cut through it all, sharp as shattered glass. "That's all you deserve," Karen said, her lips curling as she swept past my table. My sister Shannon trailed behind her like a shadow, her smirk polished and cruel. "Always invisible," she added, her words landing like small blades. "Always pathetic." I gripped the edges of my chair, knuckles white, but I didn't flinch. Their words stung, they always did, but tonight I hadn't come to beg for scraps. Tonight, I had come with a plan. The room sparkled with crystal chandeliers and the clinking of champagne glasses. 60 guests filled Raleigh Hall, business partners, old friends, the city's elite, all oblivious to what was about to unfold. My father stood at the center of it all, shaking hands and accepting congratulations, his tired smile never quite reaching his eyes. In my pocket, a small USB drive pulsed against my thigh like a second heartbeat. I'd spent 2 weeks gathering what was on it. 2 weeks of late nights, secret meetings with my friend Ellen, and the slow, sickening realization that my family's contempt wasn't just emotional, it was strategic. When the MC called for speeches, I rose to my feet. My legs trembled beneath my simple black dress, but my eyes stayed steady. Karen was at the podium, mid-sentence about family loyalty, when I stepped forward. "Let's watch something real," I said, my voice cutting through the noise like a blade. The room went still, heads turned, Karen's polished smile faltered. I walked to the stage, my heels echoing on the polished floor, and handed the USB to the nervous AV tech I'd slipped $20 to earlier. His fingers shook as he plugged it in. The screen behind me flickered to life. The first image was a text message, blown up large enough for everyone to see. "Make sure the papers are ready. Dad won't suspect a thing." Shannon's name was at the top. Kyle Ramsey's response sat below. "Karen's got the lawyer lined up." Guests rippled through the crowd like waves. The screen shifted to a draft agreement, my father's company shares, ready to be transferred to Shannon. Karen's signature already scrolled at the bottom, neat and cold. Then came the audio. Shannon's voice filled the hall, clear and smug. "Once Dad signs, it's ours. He trusts Karen too much." Kyle's laugh crackled in the background, sharp and mocking. "He's got no idea." "Turn it off," Karen screamed, her voice shrill and cracking. She lunged toward the stage, silk dress rustling, but the AV tech stepped back, hands raised. "It's already too late," I said quietly. The screen went dark, but the damage was done. All 60 guests sat in stunned silence, their eyes locked on me, on Karen, on Shannon. My stepmother's face had drained to the color of bone. Shannon looked like she might be sick. My father stood frozen near the main table, his glass of whiskey suspended midair. His eyes moved from Karen to Shannon to me, and something shifted in his expression. Confusion, yes, but also the slow, terrible dawn of understanding. I didn't wait for him to speak. I'd learned long ago not to wait for my father's words. "This isn't about revenge," I said, my voice steady, though my heart hammered against my ribs. "It's about truth. You've all spent years pretending I don't exist. My stepmother and sister spent years making sure I knew exactly where I stood, invisible, unwanted, less than." I paused, scanning the room. "But I see you, all of you, and tonight, I'm making sure you see me." The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. Days before the reckoning, I sat in my Raleigh apartment, staring at an email that felt like a trap. As a documentary filmmaker, I spent my days chasing stories of people the world overlooked. Ironic, since that had been my life. My tiny studio apartment was cluttered with camera gear and half-edited scripts. It was my sanctuary in a city that worshipped wealth, a place where I could piece together other people's truths while avoiding my own. My mother passed when I was 5, leaving me with memories too faint to hold. By 7, my stepmother Karen moved in with her daughter Shannon, 3 years my junior. That's when everything changed. Karen's cold stare made it clear I wasn't her priority. Shannon, always trailing behind her, learned to mimic that disdain. her smirks cutting deeper than any words. Growing up, I was the afterthought. Karen dressed Shannon in designer clothes, paid for her piano lessons, and cheered at her school plays. Me? I got faded jeans and silence. At 10, I asked to join a family dinner with my father's business partners. Karen's response was sharp. "You're not part of this." Shannon chimed in. "Stay out of it." Abby, my father, buried in his real estate deals, didn't notice, or didn't care. I shrank, learning to stay quiet, to blend into the walls of our sprawling Raleigh house. My escape was a cheap camcorder I bought at 16. I filmed stories of kids like me, ones nobody saw. Karen called it wasted time. Shannon scoffed. "Your films won't change anything." I left home at 18, piecing together a life through scholarships and late-night editing sessions. Shannon, meanwhile, glided through college on family money, landing internships my father's name secured. Karen threw her a lavish graduation party I wasn't invited to. My father sent me a check with a scribbled note, "Congrats." That was it. The distance between us grew, but the sting of being less than never faded. I poured it into my work, crafting documentaries that won small awards but never the spotlight. My friend Ellen Reed, a graphic designer I'd met in high school, was the only one who saw what I could do. Over coffee at a downtown cafe, she'd say, "Your films matter, Abby. Don't let them dim you." When the email for my father's birthday arrived, signed by Karen, my first instinct was to delete it. The words were formal, like I was a distant cousin, not family. I pictured walking into that elegant hall surrounded by Raleigh's elite, only to be ignored again. "Why bother?" I muttered. Ellen, sprawled on my couch with a sketchpad, grabbed my phone. "You're going," she said, her voice firm. "Not to please them, to prove you're not invisible." I stared at her, my chest tight. I'd spent years dodging these confrontations, burying the hurt in my work. But Ellen's words hit hard. She was right. I wasn't that kid hiding in her room anymore. 2 weeks before the party, Ellen burst into my apartment one evening, her eyes wide with urgency. She'd been sketching at a downtown Raleigh cafe when she overheard Shannon on her phone, her voice hushed but smug. "It's all set, Kyle," Shannon had said, barely audible over the clink of coffee cups. "The shares will be mine soon." Ellen caught the name Kyle, Shannon's college friend, always lurking at family gatherings with a slick grin. She didn't hear much else, but that phrase sent a chill through her. When she told me, my heart stopped. My father's real estate company was his life's work, the cornerstone of our family's wealth. Why was Shannon whispering about it like a thief? I felt a knot in my stomach. Karen had always pushed Shannon to the front, grooming her to inherit my father's legacy while I was left out of every boardroom talk. Was this their latest scheme to cut me out completely? Or worse, were they plotting against my father? Ellen paced my living room, tossing her sketchpad onto the couch. "Shannon's up to something," she said. "She's not smart enough to cover her tracks." I nodded, my mind racing. I'd spent years capturing other people's secrets on film. Now I had to uncover my family's. We started digging that night. Ellen remembered a shared cloud account from a freelance job she'd done for Shannon's marketing side hustle. Shannon, true to form, hadn't changed her password. We huddled over my laptop, the screen's glow casting shadows as we scrolled through her messages. Most were trivial, dress fittings, lunch plans, but then we found a thread with Kyle Ramsey. "Make sure the papers are ready," Shannon typed. "Dad won't suspect a thing." Kyle's response was blunt. "Karen's got the lawyer lined up." My breath caught. They were planning to transfer my father's company shares to Shannon, tricking him into signing them away. Karen was orchestrating it, using her charm to keep my father clueless. I stared at the screen, anger bubbling up. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was betrayal, pure and cold. My father had poured his soul into that company, building it from a single office to a Raleigh empire. I pictured him in his study, signing deals with that quiet pride, unaware his wife and stepdaughter were scheming behind him. Ellen leaned over my shoulder, muttering, "They're playing dirty." I nodded, my jaw tight. "We need proof, something they can't deny." We kept searching. One message from Kyle jumped out, "Bring the documents tomorrow." All set for the transfer. Attached was a draft agreement detailing how my father's majority shares would go to Shannon, with Karen's signature already scrolled at the bottom. I saved it to a USB drive, my hands shaking. This was bigger than I'd imagined, a calculated move to strip my father of his legacy. I thought of confronting Karen, but her sharp tongue would twist it against me. Shannon would just laugh. No, I needed something solid, something public. Ellen had an idea. "Let's catch them talking," she said, her voice low. The next afternoon, she trailed Shannon to a bar on Fayetteville Street. Blending in with the crowd, I stayed back, editing footage at home, my phone buzzing with her updates. "They're here," she texted. Then came a shaky audio clip from her phone. Shannon's voice came through clear and cocky. "Once Dad signs, it's ours. He trusts Karen too much." Kyle's laugh crackled in the background. "He's got no idea." I gripped my phone, fury rising. They thought they could play my father for a fool, and me along with him. Back at my apartment, Ellen and I pieced it together. Karen would slip the papers into a routine contract, convincing my father it was business as usual. Shannon would get the shares, and I'd be left with nothing. Not that I wanted the money, but the lies cut deep. Ellen looked at me, her eyes fierce. "You've got enough to bury them." I clutched the USB, my resolve steeling. The party was my shot to expose them. The night of the party, I walked into the historic Raleigh Hall, its wooden columns and chandeliers glowing with old money charm. The air buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses, the kind of crowd that thrived on status. I dressed simply, a black dress, no frills, knowing I'd never blend in with the tailored suits and sparkling gowns. My hand rested in my pocket, fingers brushing the USB drive that held the truth about Karen and Shannon's scheme. It was my anchor, a reminder of why I was here. I scanned the room for my father, hoping for a glance of warmth, but he was lost in a sea of handshakes, his face lit by the glow of business talk. A young waiter approached, his expression polite but stiff. "This way, ma'am," he said, leading me past the main tables where Raleigh's elite sipped wine to a small table tucked near the emergency exit. The chair wobbled, the tablecloth was stained, and a single plate sat before me with a dry piece of bread. I stared at it, my chest tightening. This wasn't an oversight, it was deliberate. Karen's touch was all over it. I caught her eye across the room, her lips curling into a faint, satisfied smirk. She glided over, her silk dress rustling, and leaned in close. "That's all you deserve," she said, her voice low, dripping with disdain. Shannon, trailing behind in a glittering gown, let out a sharp laugh. "Always invisible," she added, her words slicing through the hum of the party. I gripped the USB tighter, my knuckles white. Their words stung, but I'd heard worse growing up. This time, I wasn't the kid who shrank away. I forced a smile, holding Karen's gaze. "Nice setup," I said, my tone steady, though my heart pounded. She raised an eyebrow, surprised I'd spoken, then turned away, dismissing me with a flick of her wrist. Shannon lingered, her smirk widening. "Don't embarrass us tonight," she said before sauntering back to the main table where she basked in the attention of my father's business partners. I sat alone, the bread untouched, my mind racing. The hall's grandeur felt suffocating, polished floors reflecting the light, walls lined with portraits of Raleigh's past. I noticed the other guests glancing my way, some with pity, others with disinterest. A woman in a pearl necklace whispered to her companion, her eyes flicking toward my table. I straightened, refusing to slouch. I wasn't here for their approval. The USB in my pocket was proof I had something they didn't. Truth. I thought of the messages I'd found. The audio of Shannon and Kyle plotting to steal my father's company. That knowledge kept me grounded even as the room seemed to close in. My father finally appeared, moving through the crowd with a tired smile. I stood, hoping to catch his eye, but Karen intercepted him, her hand on his arm, steering him toward a group of investors. He didn't see me, or maybe he chose not to. The familiar ache hit, but I pushed it down. This wasn't about winning his love tonight. It was about stopping a lie. The reckoning. As the speeches began, I felt the weight of the moment. The MC's voice echoed through the hall, praising my father's legacy in real estate. The crowd applauded as Karen stepped up, her smile polished, talking about family and loyalty. I could barely listen, my pulse racing. This was it, my chance to show them all. I caught the eye of the AV tech I'd spoken to earlier. A nervous kid who'd agreed to help after I slipped him $20. I gave him a nod, and he slipped into the control booth. Karen finished to polite claps, and the MC called for more remarks. I stood, my legs steady despite the knot in my chest. I have something to share, I said, my voice cutting through the murmurs. Heads turned, some curious, others annoyed. Karen's smile froze. Shannon's eyes narrowed from the main table. I walked to the stage, the USB in my hand, and handed it to the tech. Play it, I whispered. He plugged it in, and the screen behind me flickered to life. The video started with a grainy text message blown up for all to see. Shannon's words to Kyle. Make sure the papers are ready. Dad won't suspect a thing. Gasps rippled through the room. The screen shifted to another message. Karen's name clear, the lawyer's set. Then came the audio clip. Shannon's voice, unmistakable. Once Dad signs, it's ours. He trusts Karen too much. Kyle's laugh followed, cold and smug. He's got no idea. The crowd went silent, the air heavy with shock. I stood still, watching their faces, some wide-eyed, others whispering furiously. Karen lunged toward the stage. Turn it off, she screamed, her voice shrill and cracking. Turn it off now. But it was already too late. The screen went dark, but the truth had been revealed. All 60 guests sat in stunned silence, their eyes locked on me, on Karen, on Shannon. My stepmother's face had drained to the color of bone. Shannon looked like she might be sick. My father stood frozen near the main table, his glass of whiskey suspended midair. His eyes moved from Karen to Shannon to me, and something shifted in his expression, confusion, yes, but also the slow, terrible dawn of understanding. I didn't wait for him to speak. I'd learned long ago not to wait for my father's words. This isn't about revenge, I said, my voice steady, though my heart hammered against my ribs. It's about truth. You've all spent years pretending I don't exist. My stepmother and sister spent years making sure I knew exactly where I stood, invisible, unwanted, less than. I paused, scanning the room. But I see you, all of you, and tonight, I'm making sure you see me. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. The fallout. Karen's composure shattered like fine crystal. She rose from her seat, her voice sharp enough to draw every eye in the room. Turn it off, she snapped, her polished facade crumbling. The AV tech glanced at me, his fingers hovering over the controls, uncertainty flickering across his young face. I shook my head slowly, deliberately. The video kept rolling. The screen displayed the draft agreement in cruel clarity, Karen's signature, neat and cold, outlining the plan to transfer my father's shares to Shannon. The hall erupted in murmurs, guests turning to each other with expressions caught between disbelief and outrage. I let my gaze drift to my father, watching his face transform from confusion to something darker, the slow, terrible dawn of betrayal. He rose from his seat, his movements deliberate, his eyes never leaving Karen. Before anyone could speak, Kyle stumbled in from the back entrance, his face flushed, his tie askew. He froze as 60 pairs of eyes locked onto him, and something in him crumbled. It's true, he blurted, his voice shaking. Shannon and Karen, they planned it all. I just followed orders. The room exploded into chaos. Guests shouted questions over each other, their voices layering into an incomprehensible roar. Some glared at Shannon, who sat frozen at the main table, her practiced charm shattered into something small and vulnerable. Others pointed at Karen, their fingers accusatory, their murmurs growing louder. Karen stepped toward my father, her hands raised in a gesture of surrender, her voice trembling. Gregory, it's not what it looks like. Please, let me explain. He cut her off, his voice low but piercing, cutting through the noise like a blade. Explain this. He pointed at the screen, where the draft agreement still glowed, incriminating and undeniable. Shannon tried to speak, her words stumbling over each other. Dad, it was just a misunderstanding. Abigail twisted everything. She's always been jealous, her voice cracked, unconvincing even to her own ears. I stood silent, letting the evidence speak for itself. The guests' whispers grew louder, their judgment clear. A woman in a velvet dress leaned toward her husband, muttering about disgrace. A man in a tuxedo shook his head slowly, staring at Karen with cold disappointment. I felt a strange calm settle over me, the weight of years lifting, inch by inch. I'd done what I came to do. My father turned to me, his eyes searching mine. For the first time that night, he truly saw me. Not the afterthought, not the invisible daughter relegated to corner tables. He saw me. "You did this?" he asked, his voice soft but heavy with implication. I nodded, my throat tight. "I had to," I said. "They were going to take everything from you." He didn't respond immediately, but his gaze held something new, respect, perhaps, or regret. I couldn't tell which, and I wasn't sure it mattered anymore. Karen tried again, her voice growing shrill with desperation. "She's lying, Gregory. She's always been jealous of Shannon. Always trying to tear this family apart." But the crowd wasn't listening. The evidence was undeniable, and her mask had slipped beyond repair. Shannon stood abruptly, her face pale as parchment, and tried to slip toward the exit. But guests blocked her path, their stares cold and unforgiving. Kyle, still standing awkwardly near the back, muttered, "I didn't mean for this to happen," before trailing off as heads turned toward him. The hall felt smaller somehow, the chandeliers glow harsher as the truth settled over everyone like a fine layer of ash. I stepped back from the stage, my role done. I'd spent years being invisible, but tonight I'd made them all see. The MC cleared his throat, attempting to regain control of the evening, but the night was irreparably broken. I stood off to the side, my heart steady but my hands clenched at my sides, watching the chaos unfold. A tall man in a tailored suit rose from the main table, his face stern and unyielding. Matthew Stone, senior partner at Stone & Associates, and my father's most important business ally, surveyed the room before speaking. "Gregory," he announced, his voice cutting through the noise with practiced authority, "we've trusted your family for years. But this," he gestured at the frozen screen, still displaying Karen's signed agreement, "this is beyond comprehension. The merger is off. We're done here." The crowd gasped, head swiveling toward my father, whose face had drained of all color. Karen lurched forward, her voice shrill and desperate. "This is a mistake," she cried, her hands trembling as she faced Matthew. "Those documents were just drafts. Nothing was finalized. Please." Shannon jumped in, her face flushed with panic. "It's all a misunderstanding. Abigail twisted everything. She's always done this, always tried to make us look bad." But her voice wavered, and the guests weren't buying it. A woman in a sapphire dress turned away, whispering to her companion. A man in a bow tie shook his head slowly, his expression cold and dismissive. The room's mood had shifted irrevocably. No one trusted them anymore. I watched, silent, as the weight of their lies crushed them from all sides. Matthew didn't bother responding. He nodded curtly to his team, who gathered their coats and headed for the exit, their footsteps echoing in the now quiet hall. Other guests followed, some muttering about broken trust, others casting sharp, judgmental glances at Karen and Shannon. A couple near the bar stood abruptly, leaving half-finished drinks on the polished wood. The party, once alive with laughter and celebration, now felt like a funeral. I caught snippets of conversation as guests passed, disgraceful, how could they? Poor Gregory, as Raleigh's elite abandoned the family they had once courted. My father stood motionless near the stage, his shoulders slumped. I'd never seen him like this, stripped of his usual confidence, his empire crumbling around him. He looked at Karen, then Shannon, his eyes heavy with disappointment. "You did this behind my back," he said, his voice low, almost breaking. "Both of you, my wife, my daughter." Karen reached for his arm, her face pleading. "Gregory, please, let me explain. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I was trying to protect our future." He pulled away, shaking his head slowly. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the double doors, his silhouette fading into the dim hallway beyond. The sight hit me harder than I expected, not triumph, but a quiet, aching grief for the father I'd always wanted closer. Shannon spun toward me, her eyes blazing with fury. "You ruined everything," she hissed, her voice sharp enough to draw stares from the remaining guests. "You've always been jealous of me. Always trying to tear us down." I met her gaze, unflinching. "You did that yourself," I said, my tone calm but firm. "I just showed everyone the truth." She froze, her mouth open, but no words came. Karen, still standing near the stage, looked small for the first time, her elegance undone, her power evaporated. "You'll regret this," she muttered, but her threat lacked any real weight. The guests who remained ignored her, their backs turned as they whispered among themselves. I felt no need to respond. Their world was collapsing, and I'd only held up a mirror. Standing there, I felt something shift deep inside me. The years of being pushed aside, of being unseen, didn't vanish entirely, but their grip loosened. I wasn't the kid hiding in her room anymore, or the woman relegated to a corner table with stale bread. I'd stood up, shown the truth, and the room had finally seen me. A woman in a red gown approached, her expression soft. "That took courage," she said quietly before walking away, her heels clicking on the polished floor. Another guest, an older man with silver-framed glasses, gave me a small nod, his face unreadable, but not unkind. Their gestures, small as they were, grounded me in the moment. I wasn't alone anymore. The hall emptied quickly, the clink of glasses replaced by the hum of hushed voices and retreating footsteps. Karen and Shannon stood alone near the stage, their faces drawn and hollow, no longer the untouchable duo they'd been. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The truth had done its work. I thought of my films, the stories I'd told for others, and realized this was mine. I'd spent years documenting pain and resilience, and tonight I'd lived it, and survived. Aftermath. Months later, the dust settled slowly, like ash after a fire. The family company crumbled faster than I'd expected. Without Matthew Stone's merger, other partners pulled out, spooked by the scandal and unwilling to associate with a family torn apart by betrayal. By spring, my father's real estate empire, once a Raleigh cornerstone, was bankrupt. I read about it in the local paper. The headline stark and unforgiving: Stark Foster Properties collapses amid betrayal scandal. I felt a pang for my father, who'd poured his life into those buildings, his name carved into the city's skyline. But I didn't regret my choice. The truth had been necessary, even if it had torn everything down. Karen's fall was just as swift. Raleigh's high society, once her playground, turned its back completely. I heard she showed up at a charity gala, her usual elegance and tact. But the women she'd once dined with, ladies in pearls and tailored dresses, gave her cold shoulders and turned away. Whispers followed her everywhere. She betrayed Gregory. She tried to steal from her own husband. Invitations dried up, and her name vanished from the social pages. I saw her once, crossing Hillsborough Street on a gray afternoon. Her face was drawn, her shoulders hunched, clutching a coffee cup like it was her only anchor. She looked older, diminished. I didn't stop to speak. There was nothing left to say. Shannon's charm couldn't save her either. Her marketing gigs, built on her polished, Instagram perfect image, evaporated overnight. A major ad campaign with a regional bank dropped her after the news spread. Her face no longer welcome on billboards or in boardrooms. I overheard a former client at a downtown cafe saying, "She thought she could play everyone. Now look at her." Shannon tried to pivot, posting desperate updates on social media, trying to spin the narrative. But the comments were brutal: accusations, mockery, silence. She'd always thrived on attention, but now it was gone, replaced by a void she couldn't fill. My father retreated entirely. He moved to a small condo outside Raleigh, cutting contact with Karen and Shannon completely. I tried calling once, leaving a voicemail that I hoped he'd hear, but he didn't respond. A mutual friend told me he was spending his days fishing, a quiet escape from the wreckage of his life. I wanted to reach out, to rebuild something, but his silence spoke louder than words. He'd trusted Karen, believed in Shannon, and their betrayal had broken him. I carried that weight, knowing my actions had forced him to see the truth, but I couldn't undo the past, and I couldn't make him ready to face me. A new beginning. For me, life took a different turn. A week after the party, I got a call from Susan Clark, a producer I'd met at a local film festival years ago. She'd been at the gala, one of the few who'd nodded at me with quiet respect as she left. "Your courage stuck with me," she said, her voice warm over the phone. "I've got a project, a documentary on family legacies, the ones we inherit and the ones we build ourselves. You in?" I met her at a small studio off Glenwood Avenue, where we pored over contracts and storyboards. Susan's confidence in me felt new, untainted by the family drama. I signed the deal, my pen steady, a spark of pride igniting in my chest. It was my first real break, a chance to tell stories that truly mattered. The work consumed me. I spent mornings editing footage, afternoons scouting locations, evenings lost in the rhythm of creation. My apartment, now a maze of scripts and coffee mugs, was a space of possibility, not escape. Susan pushed me to dig deeper, to capture raw truths, the kind I'd always chased. I thought back to my old camcorder days, filming shadows to feel seen. But this was different. I was building something of my own. The crew respected me, their nods and quick smiles a quiet validation. For the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. Raleigh felt smaller now, its old wounds fading. I walked past the shuttered Foster Properties office one evening, its sign rusted, windows dark and empty. I didn't linger. The past was done, and I was moving forward. Susan's project was gaining buzz. With screenings planned across the state, I poured myself into it, framing shots that told stories of loss and resilience, echoes of my own journey. My name, my work, was starting to carry weight. I thought of my father sometimes, wondering if he'd ever call. I hoped he'd find peace, maybe even pride in what I'd become. Karen and Shannon were shadows now, their lives unraveling while mine took shape. I didn't wish them harm, but their absence felt like freedom. The city, once a cage of expectations, was now a canvas for my stories. I sat at my desk one night, the script open before me, and felt a quiet strength settle into my bones. This was my future, and I was ready to write it. 1 year later, I stood on my own stage, ready to share my work. The theater on Har Street was packed, the air humming with anticipation. My documentary, a tapestry of family legacies, woven with raw honesty and years of accumulated pain, was about to premiere. I stood at the podium, my hands steady, looking out at faces I didn't know, strangers who'd come to see my story, to witness the truth I'd been brave enough to tell. The lights dimmed and the screen glowed, each frame a piece of my heart. I watched the audience lean forward, their eyes locked on scenes of fractured bonds and quiet triumphs. When the credits rolled, applause erupted, warm, genuine, overwhelming. I felt a swell of pride, not just for the film, but for the path that led me here. After the screening, people lingered, their voices soft as they shared their own stories. A young woman in a denim jacket thanked me, her eyes bright with tears. "Your film made me want to speak up," she said. An older man in a tweed cap shook my hand, his grip firm. "You've got something real here, miss. Don't let anyone tell you different." Their words stayed with me, proof that my work mattered. Susan had been right, telling the truth, even when it hurt, could move people. I signed posters in the lobby, my name in bold print, a marker of how far I'd come. The final thread. Later that week, my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen in months. Karen's. Her voicemail was hesitant, her voice stripped of its usual edge, almost fragile. "Abigail," she said, "it's Karen. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I think we need to talk, for old time's sake." I listened, my thumb hovering over the call button, but I didn't press it. Instead, I deleted the message, my heart calm and steady. Karen's world had unraveled, and she wanted something from me, forgiveness, maybe, or a way back into my life. But I was done carrying her weight. I'd spent years under her shadow, and I wouldn't step back into it. I turned off my phone and walked away, the decision final. One crisp morning, I drove to the old Raleigh Hall. Its wooden columns were weathered now, the chandeliers dark and dusty. The building stood empty, a relic of that night when everything changed. I parked and stepped out, my camera in hand. The air was cool, the street quiet. I framed a shot of myself in front of the hall, my reflection faint in the glass doors. The click of the shutter felt like a full stop, a way to mark my freedom. This place, once a stage for my pain, was now just a backdrop. I wasn't the woman relegated to a corner table with stale bread anymore. I was someone new, unburdened. I thought about the journey that brought me here. The truth had been my weapon, not to destroy, but to build. Exposing Karen and Shannon's scheme had cost me a family, but it had given me something greater, myself. I'd learned that silence could trap you, but speaking out, even when your voice shook, could set you free. I wanted others to know that, too. At the screening, I'd ended my speech with a simple call: stand up for your truth. It's worth it. I hoped someone somewhere would hear it and find their own courage. Raleigh had changed for me. Its streets, once heavy with memories, now felt open, full of possibility. I drove past cafes and parks, seeing them with new eyes. My apartment, cluttered with scripts and film reels, was a space of creation, not escape. I was no longer defined by what I'd lost, but by what I'd built. The documentary was just the start. Susan had already pitched another project, and I was ready to dive in, to keep telling stories that mattered. As I stood in my kitchen that night, pouring coffee, I felt a quiet certainty settle over me. The past would always be there, a shadow in the corner, but it no longer held me. I'd faced it, named it, and let it go. My camera sat on the counter, ready for the next frame. I was free, not just from Karen, or the family, or that old hall, but from the fear of being unseen. The truth had given me that, and I'd carry it forward, one story at a time. If you were in my place, would you dare expose everything in front of your family and friends, or would you stay silent to keep the peace? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your answer might inspire someone who's facing the same battle.